Welcome my channel. Tonight's story is one that left even hardened witnesses shaken to their core. We're uncovering the jungle slave girl's deadly secret that shocked everyone. A dark historical mystery pieced together from forgotten records, survivor accounts, and hidden colonial reports. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. A lot of hard work goes into researching true data, separating fact from myth, and bringing these buried stories back into the light for you. It began on a humid afternoon when the jungle pressed close to the edges of the plantation, its thick green walls alive with insects, birds, and unseen movement. The girl was no more than 16, enslaved since childhood, known only by a name given to her by others, a name that never truly belonged to her. She worked near the tree line that day, carrying bundles of cut cane, her bare feet sinking into warm mud. The overseer remembered later that she had been unusually quiet, her eyes fixed on the dark stretch of forest beyond the fields, as if something inside it was calling to her. No one noticed the exact moment she vanished. That was the strangest part. 1 second she was there, bent under her load. The next her place was empty. No cry for help, no broken branches, no sign of struggle. At first, they assumed she had simply wandered off to escape punishment or exhaustion. Enslaved people ran before, and the jungle, vast and merciless, was known to swallow the desperate whole. But as the minutes passed and she didn't return, unease began to spread. By sunset, her absence could no longer be ignored. The overseer gathered men and sent them toward the forest edge, shouting her name into the shadows. The jungle answered only with the hum of insects and the distant call of animals. The air grew thicker as they stepped under the canopy, where sunlight barely touched the ground. The soil was soft, marked with countless overlapping tracks, but none clearly hers. It was as if she had stepped off the earth itself. That night, torches flickered at the edge of the trees as the search continued. Dogs were brought in, trained to follow human scent. They sniffed the ground, tugged at their leashes, and then froze. Witnesses later said the animals whimpered, tails tucked tight, refusing to go any farther. One dog broke free and ran back toward the plantation, howling in panic. Another simply lay down, shaking, nose pressed into the dirt. The men exchanged uneasy glances. The jungle was dangerous, yes, but animals rarely reacted like this. By morning, rumors had already begun to grow. Some said she had been taken by wild beasts. Others whispered she had been lured away, not by men, but by something older, something that lived deep within the forest. The enslaved workers spoke quietly among themselves, recalling old stories passed down through generations, tales of spirits that watched the borders between captivity and freedom, of forests that protected those who crossed into them under the right conditions. The masters dismissed such talk as superstition, but fear had already taken root. A second search was organized, larger this time. Armed men pushed deeper into the jungle, cutting paths with machetes, marking trees so they could find their way back. They found signs of passage, snapped vines, crushed leaves, but the trail never lasted long. It would appear for a few steps and then vanish, as if the ground itself had closed behind her. One man claimed he heard laughter, echoing faintly through the trees, soft and distant, but when he asked the others, they said they'd heard nothing. Days passed. No body was found. No blood, no torn clothing. The plantation began to change in subtle ways. Workers reported seeing movement at the edge of the forest at dusk, a slim figure standing just beyond the light, watching. When they looked again, it was gone. At night, strange sounds drifted from the jungle, not animal cries, but something closer to human voices, layered and indistinct. Some swore they heard her singing, a slow, mournful tune she used to hum while working. What disturbed people most was not that she had disappeared, but how completely the jungle seemed to claim her. It was as if the forest itself had erased her tracks, hidden her from those who sought to drag her back. The masters insisted she was dead, that no one could survive alone in such a place. Yet weeks later, hunters reported finding fresh footprints near the river, small, barefoot prints leading into the undergrowth, never out. The disappearance became more than an escape. It became a question no one could answer. How did a girl vanish without a trace from a place watched day and night? How did she evade men, dogs, and weapons, slipping into a jungle that killed the unprepared within days? And most unsettling of all, why did those who searched for her begin to feel watched, followed, as if the forest itself had chosen sides? Long before her deadly secret would be revealed, before fear would replace certainty, one truth had already settled in the minds of everyone on the plantation. The jungle had taken her, not as prey, but as something else entirely. And whatever she had become in those shadows, she was no longer a helpless girl running for her life. At first, the men believed the stories were exaggerated, fear turning coincidence into legend. But as the days passed, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. The first man to follow her into the jungle did so alone, confident and armed, certain he would be the one to drag her back and earn favor. He entered just before dawn, when the mist still clung low to the ground. Witnesses saw him disappear between the trees, his silhouette swallowed by green and shadow. He never returned. By nightfall, his rifle was found leaning against a tree at the forest's edge, clean and untouched, as if carefully placed there. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, only silence. A second group went in the next day, 3 men this time. They tied ropes around their waists so they wouldn't lose each other, cutting their way deeper with blades. Hours later, one rope was found severed. The fibers sliced cleanly, not frayed or torn. The other 2 ropes vanished completely. The jungle offered no explanation. When the men failed to return by nightfall, panic spread across the plantation. Even the masters, hardened by years of cruelty and control, felt something shift, a sense that the rules no longer applied beyond the tree line. Word traveled fast. Nearby settlements heard the rumors a runaway girl who led men into the jungle, and none came back alive. Some laughed it off, claiming wild animals or disease. Others, especially those who knew the forest, shook their heads. The jungle was dangerous, yes, but it left signs, bones, scraps of clothing, something. This left nothing. It was as if the men were being erased. A larger search was organized, this time with experienced trackers and local hunters. They moved cautiously, marking their path, whispering instead of shouting. As they advanced, the jungle seemed to close around them. Vines snagged at their clothes. Insects swarmed without warning. The air felt heavy, pressing against the chest. One hunter later swore that the trees themselves seemed closer together than before, their roots twisting like fingers beneath the soil. Then came the sounds. Soft at first, footsteps not matching their own, always just out of sight. A branch snapping behind them, though no one was there. and sometimes faint laughter, not mocking, not joyful, but calm, certain. One man claimed he heard his own name spoken in a familiar voice, the same tone the girl once used when asking for water or rest. When he turned toward it, the undergrowth parted slightly, as if inviting him forward. His companions grabbed him just in time, dragging him back as he stared ahead, glassy-eyed and trembling. They found signs that made no sense. Footprints that appeared suddenly and ended abruptly. Patches of earth pressed flat, as if someone had been standing there for hours watching. And strangest of all, they found remains, not of the girl, but of those who had followed her before. A boot with the leather neatly split down the side. A belt laid across a fallen log, arranged carefully. No bones, no blood, no decay. It was as if whatever happened out there was deliberate, controlled. By the fourth disappearance, no one volunteered to search anymore. Even armed patrols refused. Dogs were brought again, and again they refused to advance, whining and pulling back, some collapsing entirely as if overcome by terror. One handler said the animals weren't smelling death, they were smelling something that shouldn't exist. Stories began to circulate among the enslaved workers, whispered only at night. They spoke of the girl not as a victim, but as someone chosen, someone the jungle had accepted. Old tales resurfaced, of forests that protected the broken, of spirits that taught survival through blood and silence, of those who crossed into the green and came back changed. Some believed she had learned the jungle's rules, where to step, when to move, how to disappear. Others believed something darker had found her first and taught her how to hunt instead of hide. What terrified the plantation most was the pattern. Every man who followed her did so with violence in his heart, to punish, to capture, to own. None returned. Those who stayed behind, who only watched from a distance, lived. It was as if the jungle itself was judging who was allowed to enter and who would never leave. Soon, the edge of the forest became a forbidden boundary. No one crossed it without fear. At dusk, people swore they saw movement, a slim figure gliding between trees, never fully visible, always watching. And when someone was foolish enough to step closer, a sound would rise from deep within the jungle, not a scream, not a warning, but something worse, the soft, steady rhythm of breathing, as if the forest itself had noticed them. By then, everyone understood the truth they were too afraid to say aloud. She wasn't being hunted anymore. She was the one deciding who came back. And the jungle, vast, ancient, and patient, had made her its secret. Deep inside the jungle, far beyond where the plantation paths ended, and even the hunters feared to trade, the girl learned something that changed everything. At first, survival was all that mattered. She moved blindly, driven by fear and instinct, tearing her skin on thorns, sinking into mud, drinking from puddles she prayed wouldn't poison her. The jungle was loud, alive, overwhelming. Every sound felt like a threat. Every shadow felt like death waiting to strike. But the jungle did not kill her. Instead, it watched. Days passed, then weeks. Hunger sharpened her senses. Fear slowed her breathing. She began to notice patterns, how insects scattered before certain snakes appeared, how birds went silent seconds before a predator passed through. She learned which leaves burned the tongue and which eased pain. She learned that the jungle was not chaos, but order, an order brutal and unforgiving, yet precise. And slowly, painfully, she realized something terrifying and powerful. The jungle responded to those who listened. Her deadly secret was not a single discovery, but a series of truths that unfolded as she adapted. She found places where the ground gave way beneath careless steps, pits hidden under leaves, old animal traps swallowed by vines. She learned how certain plants, crushed and rubbed into skin, masked human scent. She discovered that some tree saps caused hallucinations when inhaled, while others burned like fire on open wounds. The jungle was a weapon, and she was learning how to use it. But the moment that changed her forever came near a river bend, where the air was thick and still, weak and feverish. She collapsed near a cluster of stones slick with moss. As her vision blurred, she heard voices, not the shouting of men, but something softer, older. She later described it as a feeling more than a sound, like the jungle itself pressing knowledge into her. When she awoke, the fever was gone. In its place was clarity. She noticed how the insects avoided certain plants, how animals refused to cross certain patches of ground. The jungle was marking its own boundaries, and she now understood them. From that moment on, she stopped running. She began choosing where to move, when to vanish, when to stay still for hours without breathing too deeply. She learned how to disappear in plain sight, pressing her body into tree roots, coating her skin with mud and ash, becoming part of the forest's texture. Men could walk past her within arm's reach and never see her. And when they did see her, just a glimpse, a shadow, a movement, panic did the rest. Her secret, the one that would shock everyone who later tried to explain the disappearances, was this: she never attacked directly. The jungle did it for her. She guided her pursuers into places where sound echoed and directions twisted, where paths circled back on themselves. She let fear exhaust them. Hunger weakened them. Insects infected their wounds. By the time the jungle closed in, they were already broken. Some fell into ravines. Some drank poisoned water. Some simply lay down and never rose again. But there was something darker still, something even the enslaved workers whispered about with dread. It was said she learned how to make the jungle notice certain people. By crushing specific leaves and hanging them on branches, by marking trees with sap and ash, she could draw predators, insects, and even swarms toward a path. Men thought they were being hunted by her, but in truth, they were being offered to the forest. Those who survived long enough to flee spoke of hearing her voice, calm, close, sometimes behind them, even when she wasn't there. Others swore they saw her standing ahead on the path, watching silently, only to realize moments later that the ground beneath them had turned to sucking mud or thorn-covered roots. Fear made them careless. Carelessness killed them. What shocked everyone later was not just that she survived, but how completely she transformed. She had learned the jungle's oldest lesson. Strength didn't come from force, but from understanding. She became a part of its rhythm. When to move, when to wait, when to let silence do the work. The masters believed no enslaved girl could outwit armed men and trained trackers. Science, reason, and arrogance told them it was impossible. That belief is what doomed them. They didn't understand that the jungle didn't need her to be strong, it needed her to be patient. By the time the truth began to surface, it was already too late. The jungle had accepted her, taught her, protected her, and in return, she gave it exactly what it demanded: those who entered with chains in their hearts. Her deadly secret was never magic. It was knowledge, ancient, unforgiving, and perfectly adapted to a world that had shown her no mercy. and once she learned it, there was no force left that could take her back. As the disappearances continued, the jungle slave girl stopped being spoken of as a runaway. She became something else entirely, a name people avoided saying aloud. A presence felt more than seen. Witnesses began to emerge, not from those who chased her, but from those who survived brief encounters with her. Their accounts were fragmented, inconsistent, and terrified, yet all shared the same unsettling details. And it was those details that transformed her into a living legend of fear. One of the first witnesses was a young hunter sent to check traps near the jungle edge. He returned before nightfall, pale and shaking, his hands cut and bleeding. He claimed he had seen her standing on a fallen tree, just beyond the reach of sunlight. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was watching him. He said her eyes didn't blink and her body didn't move. Only her head turned as he tried to step away. When he ran, he swore he heard her footsteps behind him, perfectly matched to his own, until suddenly they stopped. When he dared to look back, she was gone. Another account came from a plantation guard who believed the stories were meant to frighten him. Armed and confident, he pushed into the jungle alone at dawn. Hours later, he stumbled back out, missing his weapon, his clothes torn, his voice barely a whisper. He told others that he had followed what he thought were her tracks, only to realize too late that they were circling him. He claimed she never touched him. She didn't need to. She let the jungle do everything, the thorns, the insects, the sudden drop-offs hidden beneath leaves. He said the worst part wasn't the pain, but the feeling that she knew exactly where he was at all times. Stories spread quickly after that. People said she appeared in places she couldn't possibly reach so fast, on one side of the river, then hours later deep in the forest. Some claimed she stood in the open, letting herself be seen, only to vanish when approached. Others said they never saw her at all, only felt her presence. The sudden stillness, the way birds fell silent, the sense of being watched from every direction at once. What frightened people most was her calm. Witnesses agreed on that. There was no rage in her expression, no fear, no desperation. She looked settled, as if the jungle had given her something she had never known before: control. One man described it best when he said, "She didn't look like someone hiding from us. She looked like someone who knew we didn't belong there." The enslaved workers began telling their own versions of the story, passed quietly at night. To them, she wasn't a monster. She was proof that survival didn't always mean obedience. Some called her a protector, others a warning. They said she punished only those who entered the jungle with violence in their hearts. Children were told not to wander near the trees at dusk, not because she would harm them, but because the jungle around her no longer followed human rules. The masters tried to dismiss the growing legend as hysteria, but fear was already embedded too deeply. Men refused to patrol alone. Dogs were kept chained at night. Torches burned until dawn. Even then, strange things continued. Tools went missing and reappeared days later, neatly placed at the jungle edge. Tracks appeared overnight, circling cabins but never crossing thresholds. And sometimes, just before sunrise, people heard singing, soft, slow, and unfamiliar, drifting from the trees. One of the most chilling accounts came from a group of traders passing through the region. They camped near the jungle for the night and reported seeing a figure standing at the edge of their firelight. At first, they thought she was a child seeking help, When one of them stood and called out, she stepped closer, just enough for them to see her face. They said her eyes reflected the fire like an animal's, and her skin was marked with ash and mud in deliberate patterns. Before they could react, the fire died out all at once, as if smothered. By the time they relit it, she was gone. None of them slept that night. What shocked everyone was how the story changed behavior. The jungle edge became a boundary no one dared cross. Violence slowed. Punishment softened. Fear did what morality never had. The idea that she might be watching, that she might know, lingered in every action. She had become an unseen judge, a reminder that control was not absolute. Over time, the legend grew beyond the truth, as legends always do. Some said she could speak to animals. Others believed she could vanish into smoke or command the forest itself. But beneath the exaggerations was something real and terrifying. A girl who had learned how to survive so completely that the people who once owned her no longer felt safe in their own world. She was no longer just a runaway. She was the proof of failure, of arrogance, of cruelty, of the belief that power could never be challenged. And in that way, her legend became far deadlier than any weapon. Because fear spreads faster than chains ever could. And once the jungle slave girl became a story people believed in, no one needed to see her anymore to be afraid. The truth finally surfaced not in a dramatic confrontation, but in fragments, scattered reports, terrified confessions, and one final discovery that no one expected. For months, the jungle slave girl had been blamed for every disappearance, every death, every sound that came from the trees at night. But when the final pieces came together, what shocked everyone wasn't just her, what she had done. It was what she had become to others. It began when a group of traders, traveling through the region, found something deep in the jungle after a violent storm. Floodwaters had torn through part of the forest, stripping away layers of leaves and soil that had hidden the ground for years. What they discovered wasn't a body, but evidence, remains of old camps, carefully arranged and deliberately hidden. Stone circles blackened by fire, sharpened wooden stakes placed at precise angles, bundles of dried plants tied with vines. This wasn't chaos, it was planning, intelligence, survival refined into system. Among the items was something unmistakable. Pieces of cloth taken from plantation uniforms, cut cleanly, never torn. Some had markings scratched into them, not words, but symbols. The traders didn't understand them, but when they showed them to local tribes, the reaction was immediate and unsettling. Elders recognized the patterns as warnings, symbols used to mark land claimed by those who would defend it without mercy. Not magic, territory. That was the first shock. The second came when one elder said something that silenced the room. The girl was not alone. According to tribal accounts, a lone young woman had emerged from the jungle months earlier, thin, scarred, but unafraid. She didn't beg. She didn't threaten. She offered knowledge. She shared paths through the forest no outsider could survive. She taught which plants healed and which killed. She warned of places where the ground swallowed men whole. In return, she was given shelter, tools, and something she had never been allowed before, a choice. The disappearances were never random. That was the revelation that stunned everyone. The men who died were those who came armed, violent, or determined to drag her back. Those who wandered too close, without intent to harm, were frightened, missiled, driven away, but not killed. The jungle slave girl had drawn a line, and anyone who crossed it knowingly paid the price. Even more shocking was how she used fear. She didn't need to attack most of the time. She let stories do the work. She allowed herself to be seen just enough to spread panic. She left signs, footprints, objects, echoes, calculated to travel back to the plantations. Fear became her shield. Rumor became her army. And then came the final truth, the one no one was prepared for. A former tracker, gravely ill and close to death, confessed what he had seen years earlier, but never dared speak. He said he once followed her trail and reached a clearing where several paths met. She stood there waiting for him, not hiding, not running. She told him calmly to turn back. When he refused, she didn't touch him. She simply pointed. He followed her gesture and saw what stopped him cold. The jungle floor ahead was covered in bones, old and new, human and animal alike, arranged deliberately to show where the forest ended and her law began. She let him live so he could carry the warning. The masters believed she was a monster. The jungle tribes believed she was a survivor. The enslaved believed she was justice in motion, and the truth was all of it at once. The final shock wasn't that she killed. It was that she learned restraint. She chose who lived and who didn't, not out of rage, but out of understanding. She had rebuilt herself in a world that tried to erase her, using the jungle not as a hiding place, but as a boundary no one else controlled. By the time plantations realized the deaths had stopped, it was already over. No more searches were ordered. No more men were sent. The jungle edge became untouchable ground, and the girl, she was never captured, never found, never punished. Some say she stayed with the tribes. Others believe she disappeared deeper into the forest, becoming something closer to myth than human. But one truth remains undeniable. She didn't just escape slavery. She created a world where no one could claim her again. That was the deadly secret that shocked everyone. She was never hunted. She was enforcing her freedom.